Mark, it's great to be with you today. Thanks for taking some time to talk through your founder story.
Looking forward to it, Andy, and thanks
Yeah.
for helping get this out of my brain and
Yeah,
into
my
the
pleasure.
world.
Yeah, I'm excited for the world to hear it. Why don't we start just with an overview? Tell me a little bit about None to Run. What's the company about? What do you do? And we'll start there.
Sure. So None to Run at its core is an app, community, and a resource for beginner runners. To summarize, we try to utilize behavioral-based science and running best practices to help people start their running journey and create a sustainable running habit. Wherever that takes them and wherever they want that to take them, that's up to them. We have some people who want to just run, walk, and feel better about themselves and healthier. And then we've had others that have gone on to run multiple, starting from ground zero to running multiple half marathons and marathons. But at its core, it's basically getting beginner runners started and helping them create confidence and a sustainable running habit.
Yeah, amazing. And we'll probably get into some of the details a little bit later, but maybe just tell us a little bit about the current state of the community and the app. Tell me about the folks you have using the app and what are you noticing currently about the current state of the business?
Yeah, for sure. So currently, we've got thousands of runners using the app all around the world. I'd say it's mostly in the United States, but definitely other countries are represented. Tends to slant towards more females using the app for whatever reason. There's a whole community aspect, which is part of my favorite bit about it, where we have a Facebook group and another community runners get together and post about their runs and support each other. They almost coach each other. Sometimes, like, I'll see some of the advice they're giving. There's some people giving other runners in the group, and I'm like, couldn't have said it better myself. So in
Yeah,
a way, I'm
yeah.
like, you think I'm getting training runners, but I'm actually like creating these ambassadors or beginner runner coaches that
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. And we'll get into a little bit more of the kind of the community experience later, but I think that's one of the really unique things about what you've created here. It's not just a program or a product, but there really is this vibrant community that's emerging as part of it. Maybe let's start at the beginning. We do a little origin story. One of the things since I've known you that stood out to me is that sports have always been a big part of your life, right? Ever since you were a kid, growing up as a kid. Can you talk a little bit about how your relationship with sports and being active in fitness has played a role from the time you were a kid to what you would eventually do
I
professionally?
thought a little bit about this and where my love for sports started. I think it comes a lot from my dad. I was born in Calgary. I have memories in the winter during the NFL football season, like of us down in our basement watching NFL football. It might have been Monday Night Football, but in between plays or during commercials, my dad, we had a Nerf football, and I would run down the length of the basement, and my dad would throw me passes, and I would catch it, and then we'd stop and watch
Love it.
football. So, yeah, that's one of my first sort of memories of me. I like this a
Yeah.
lot. And then I also started kindergarten in Calgary. And my dad was working on furthering his education, doing a master's degree. So he was coming on all the school field trips, which was pretty cool. We went skating a lot, and all the kids were learning to skate. We were probably like 5 years old. I remember my dad telling me stories, and I remember too, as we were learning to skate, and then we had our free time, most of the other kids would be skating around in a corner, having fun, playing tag. And I was the one kid just trying to perfect my skating and get better and doing laps around the ice. My dad and I get a chuckle out of that.
Amazing. Do you
Yeah.
remember?
So
Can you reconnect with what that feeling was as a 5 or 6 year old? What was happening, if you have any recollection, as you're
the
taking
only thing
this
I
life?
did is it was like when you start riding a bike for the first time and you feel the wind against your face and you're moving fast and you're like, wow, this is exciting.
Yeah.
Normally I
Yeah.
don't get to move this fast. I think it was a little bit of that and just like that freedom and speed and excitement. So anyways, that morphed into, we moved out to the West Coast to Victoria. Where my dad introduced me into other sports. Like I started playing soccer, and as I got older, that morphed into basketball. Baseball was a big part of my upbringing. I guess the one fun fact and formative thing too is I think I mentioned to you, I grew up with NBA Hall of Famer Steve Nash,
Mm.
basketball player, and we became best buddies in probably around grade 6, 7, or 8. His dad was always our soccer coach. He's from England. My dad was always our baseball coach. Me and my buddies got into basketball when we were in grade 6, and then grade 8, Steve ended up coming to this junior high school where we all went. Steve wanted to hang out with us, so he said, "Oh, I should play basketball too then, because you guys are playing basketball." He was such a good athlete that as my world in sports evolved, it was cool because Steve was so good at most sports that he pushed us and enhanced our love for all sports in general. That love of sports just kept going. And he kept going to the NBA, whereas the
Yeah.
rest of us didn't, but that's
Yeah.
totally cool.
So you've been launching people's athletic careers for a long time.
Yeah, there you go. And also, when I was thinking about this question too, one really pivotal moment was that I think I was in probably around grade 8 or grade 9, somewhere in there. My Nana, my grandma, she was my mom's mom. She was a teacher, and she bought me this book for Christmas. It was called the Sports Medicine book. And it was, I think it was basically like the textbook. Like she basically bought me a textbook on sports medicine, and I loved it. It was the best book I ever had seen in my life. And I'm like, it blew my mind that you could blend sports, because I was really into science. I like science, one of my favorite subjects. You can marry like sports and science and the body and how it works all into one thing, and that could be a career. Here I was in grade 8 reading like what I think was maybe a first year university textbook, and I loved it. So that's how I got into a little bit more of the science end of things and health and fitness. And I went down that world. I think in grade 10, we had to do a career education course, and I did my practicum in a clinic with these two guys who went to university where I ended up going up in Vancouver. And they were kinesiologists, and they worked with a lot of not just athletes, but basically helping people recover from injuries. And a lot of them were athletes. So that, again, that blew my mind. This is so cool. So that's the impetus of me really getting into this health science thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you still have that book that your Nana gave you?
I need to ask my mom and my dad to have a look, because I hope I do. If I don't, I think I'm gonna try to buy like a used copy somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Put it up on my wall. So when I did a Google search, I knew exactly which book it was.
That's amazing. It's really endlessly fascinating to me to talk to founders and entrepreneurs. And one of the patterns that I think you see is that often early loves and sometimes early wounding as well. But in this case, early love, something that you fell in love with, tends to show up again later as a really integral part of the story of what you end up building in the world.
Right.
And that's absolutely the case here with sports, the marrying of sports and science. Yeah. So cool. What
It's
else
fun
when
to
you
look back at all this. Sorry, go ahead.
absolutely no, it's okay. When you think about your formative years growing up, we talked about sports and fitness and kind of the bridging of sports and science. Are there any other important parts of your childhood or growing up experiences that you, as you look back now, you can see helped shape the person that you would become and eventually the founder that you'd become?
I'm pretty like persistent, and like when I get into something, yeah, I tend to just chip away. And that, I feel like that's a good thing, because my career did take a bit of a different path, which we can get into later, for a little while, but I never lost the love for health and fitness and sports and that type of thing.
Where'd you
Yeah,
learn that persistence? Do you think that was innate, learned from watching others, both maybe?
I don't know. Again, it goes back to like maybe when I was in kindergarten, like why was I skating laps when all the other
Right.
kids were having fun, like playing tag, and I was like the one kid just going around, round and round, trying to go faster and try to improve my turns. I mean, I think that's just who I am.
Yeah.
But to your other part of the question, I never wanted to be like an entrepreneur. or even knew how that would even look to be an entrepreneur. It was never a goal of mine, more to just do the stuff I was interested in doing. And then it seemed to just evolve into becoming an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great segue. Let's talk a little bit about that evolution then. And I know, because we've talked about it, that you have an interesting professional journey leading up to eventually founding None to Run. So can you talk a little bit about that journey and how that path led you eventually to what you're doing now?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I studied kinesiology, which is exercise science in university. So I kept down that path and I worked in that field for 2 or 3 years. I worked in a physio clinic doing exercise rehab, and I was considering going to physiotherapy school. I wasn't sure where I was going to go with it, but I still loved that field. And then, yeah, when I was working at this physio clinic, I was doing exercise rehabilitation with injured workers. I got pulled into a boardroom one day and basically laid off. They laid off like half their staff. The company was a little mismanaged and they just hired a bunch of people. And then 7 months later, oh, actually, we're going to lay you off. And I took that really personally. Yeah, almost, wow, I don't know. Yeah, it was like it was my fault. Do I belong in this field? Yeah. So, yeah, that kind of stung. At the same time, the sort of tech boom was going on. The markets, all these tech companies were being built up, and it was an interesting time on like the stock markets and so forth. So I was getting interested in that. So I was taking courses on the side on that and becoming interested. So when I got laid off, yeah, I was actually back to Steve Nash, but I got laid off and I had this time on my hands, and Steve had just got traded from Phoenix to Dallas. So I went down to Dallas and he was injured too. I think in broken foot or something. So we went down to hang out with him and train with him for 2 weeks just to take a pause from everything. And then, yeah, take some time to reflect. Anyways, so I decided I would explore my interest in the investment world and stock market and so forth. So I ended up, you have to, what's the saying? Be careful what you wish for because it become true. So I ended up getting a job in Victoria with, at the time, it was like a branch of Merrill Lynch. But so that was my start into that. And I stayed in that world up until 2021, progressed to my last role was working with a mutual fund and hedge fund company. I was the chief compliance officer. It was good and fulfilling, but always had this burning desire to somehow weave in my love and passion for sports and science and exercise. So that was always there.
You said when you got laid off from the job that you were working, the physio job that you were working, that you took it personally. And at first, I took that when I first heard you say that, I was thinking, oh, took it personally against the people that did this. But I think you actually meant something different when you explained it. It was like, I started to question maybe I'm not meant to be in this field. Can you say more about what do you think was happening there at that time for you?
Yeah, you're right. It's personally both like against them, but also just my path and trajectory through that career field and exploring where that would take me. How old was I? 21, 22, maybe 23 at the time. So still young and still, yeah, didn't know myself and took a blow to my confidence. Back in hindsight, I wish I had a coach to work with and work through it at the time, but that's my journey and no regrets and definitely like tons of positives to the where my career took me. But yeah, it definitely was like on a personal level, like a bit of a blow to my confidence to be like, wow, I thought I was good at this. And then here they are like saying this physiotherapy group of clinics saying, we don't need you anymore.
Yeah. It reminds me of it's a very human response to pain. It's like a little kid touches a hot pan. If they do that once, they're not going to do that again. They're going to make sure that
Right.
pain doesn't happen again. It sounds like there was a little bit of that dynamic maybe,
Yeah.
but it got associated with this field. I was like, oh,
Right.
maybe this field is not safe. Maybe this field is not for me. When you decided to pursue, out of curiosity, this other world of investing and finance and eventually compliance within that field, do you remember what it was that ignited that? What was it, do you think, about that particular field that captured your passion and interest at the time?
part of it was a challenge to myself, like knowing, hey, I didn't study business in school. Let's see if I can get into this field. So part of it was a challenge to myself. And again, back to the persistence.
Yeah.
It took a little while to convince people because they're asking my background, and took a little while to convince people or get used to telling my story that
Yeah.
how can I bridge over from exercise science into the business world. Yeah, I think that personal, it was some personal motivation that I was wanted to take from, oh, I just got laid off. I'm going to show you I can do anything else I want. So I learned a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Like I said, it was an exciting time. Like all these companies were, it was the internet boom. There was lots going on. And there's a lot of money to be made. I was young. I was like, oh, you can make lots of money doing this. So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of that. I don't think it was one thing, just a mixture of all those different things.
Yeah. I get this image of you metaphorically skating laps.
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna get this. I'm gonna get fast and I'm
Yeah.
gonna get good. So, and how long were you in that field?
Oh, it would have been probably from 2000 until 2021, 20 years.
At what point did you start to sense that maybe a transition was coming for you? I'm thinking specifically like the inspiration to start None to Run, but maybe there are other factors that you can think of as well.
Yeah. So a lot of it was when I met my wife, Sarah. When we met, she was working in like digital marketing. And so she was exposed to this whole world that I didn't really know about, like more sort of internet and tech focused and marketing, and businesses online were taking off. My wife and I moved to London, England in 2007, and she was again working in the digital sort of marketing space. And she was the one that said, you should start like a blog. She's seeing all these other people like that have blogs, and they were like getting lots of interest and traffic, and there's ways you can monetize and stuff. So actually on her advice, and then my brother was like, he studied at computer science university. He coded up a website for me, like hand coded it. It's crazy when I look back at it. And so I started writing about health and fitness.
2007, you said?
2007, 2000.
Yeah.
And I started writing about health and fitness stuff on this blog, all just doing it in my free time, still a job. On every 2 days, I would break the website, and my brother would get pissed off at me. He'd say, I told you not to touch that code. And then, yeah, I started interviewing people. I was getting in touch with industry experts and nutrition, running, different health and fitness topics. And I'd interview them and then I'd post the interviews. And so I really enjoyed that. And then it got to the point where I was talking more about running. And then my blog was called Healthynomics at the time. So it was very broad, but I started talking more about running. I'd always ran, but I was getting more focused on my running, and I ran my first marathon. I think it was 2008 in Dublin, Ireland. Fast forward a bit, Sarah and I moved back to Canada. And that was a real pivotal time because I had actually explored trying to do something full time in that space. Like my health and science interest, and I had looked into, actually I did. I started an e-commerce site where I sold rehabilitation, like exercise rehab equipment. I was like basically like drop shipping, take orders, and then another warehouse would ship the orders. I did that for a little while and learned a lot from that. That was interesting, but kept my blog going.
Yeah.
I decided I'm going to continue to work my job while doing this. Obviously for financial reasons, like Toronto was an expensive place to live. So there was more money. And I thought, I can still be happy. I'm actually scratching my own itch of I've got exposure to do all this stuff. Without a boss, I could be creative to do whatever I want. And so I, again, kept skating around the ice rink, never stopped. And then I had this moment where I'm talking more and more about running. Like, why don't I just stop being so broad and focus on running? And that's where it started to shape towards what None to Run became. Do you have anything to add before I can take us into how None to Run started if you want?
I'm super excited to hear that. Again, it feels like we're coming back to this image of you as a 5-year-old skating around. Nobody's telling you to practice skating. It's this pursuit of love, but it's a kind of persistence that it seems to be related to love, but also getting lost in the thing that you're doing and a desire to get better.
Right.
Yeah, so before we shift into the beginnings of None to Run, I guess there was one more thing I was curious about. So it starts with this broad love of fitness, and then it starts to narrow. But it sounds like the decision to narrow came after, well, it wasn't like a calculated decision. Running's the place where a business can be built. It was running's the place where my interest continues to come back to. And it seemed to mirror your own journey of running marathons and training, dedicating more of your time to training. Am I seeing that correctly?
Yeah, for sure. That's what took me to that. And it's like, you're better to be the place or the resource for a more narrow
Okay.
people.
Yeah.
Whereas before I was I put myself in someone who'd be reading my stuff and I'm like, I start thinking, why would they keep coming back? Like maybe they're like me, they have a general interest, but sometimes I'm talking about paleo diet. And then the next day could be
Right.
talking about shin splints. And then the
Right.
next day talking about how to build healthy habits. It was like all over the map. And I thought maybe if this does want to turn into something, I need to focus a bit more. My energy was already going towards running. So it was coming from two angles.
Let's talk about the kind of convergent period that you entered into where it was like, okay, running's the focus. Tell me about the idea of None to Run. Like, how did you come to that idea? And tell me about the beginning.
Yeah. So running was become the focus. And again, my sort of blog or company or whatever was called Healthynomics at the time. So I'm like, okay, I need to change that. It needs to be around running. And then I just started digging around, reading Runner's World, all the stuff. Like, what's out there for runners? What resources are available for runners? And then I don't know who pointed me to Reddit or how, but I just started, was like, oh, wow, Reddit's amazing. It has all these,
Yeah.
basically a giant forum for every topic you could ever dream of. So I started reading about, like, Couch to 5K was very popular. So I started reading a bit about Couch to 5K and some of the subreddits around that topic. And then I was reading through tons of comments. And then I started to recognize a common trend.
Mm.
They were either, it was basically progressed too fast and people thought themselves like, I can either do it or I'm a failure. I'm not a runner. How can I help those people? And so I started to think about Couch to 5K and it was like, what if the goal is not to run a specific distance? It's just about running. So I thought, okay, instead of these people going from the couch to this 5K goal where it's very much either success or failed, no, the goal here is just to run. Doesn't matter how fast you go, how far you go. And we're starting from zero. So I'm like, okay, none. And then I'm like, let's rhyme none to run. That's perfect. So I came up with that. And then I'm like, okay, that's the angle I want to take. And then from there, I started developing this running plan where basically spaced it out using my science and training background to like, okay, how's this look? I want it to be longer and more gentle and progress slower so where people don't feel so demoralized when they get to the second week or even the first week and they're like, I can't even do this week. I'll never be a runner. So I'm like, how do I scale that way back so where people start those first few runs like I almost want them to feel like, oh, this was too easy for me. So I wrote this plan with that mindset in place. And I wrote this on the plans. If the first couple runs felt too easy, perfect. That's what you want. You want to have
Mm.
some gas left in your tank. So I wrote this PDF plan and I had all these blog articles from my previous blog that I brought over and just kept talking about running. And people would sign up on my website to get email updates and to get a PDF of this running plan. And so this would have been, geez, what year would this have been? Probably about 8 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago. And then over time, I noticed like I was getting like quite a few emails. I think over a couple years, 2, 3 years, I was all of a sudden up to 25,000 emails. And people were enjoying the plan. They liked that it was a lot more approachable. But I started getting questions, and there was one question that I was getting more often than others because None to Run, same as Coast to 5K. It's a run walk base. So there's intervals, and people kept saying, "This is awesome. Like, how do you recommend that I program these intervals and memorize the intervals?" There's a couple apps that have functionality where you can create your own workouts. I had people writing with pen on their hand and using a stopwatch and just looking at their hand and doing that. And then eventually I made a podcast with the running, like a free podcast. Like, okay, you want to do the workouts, here's a free podcast, go for it, use the podcast. And then I was getting another set of emails saying, I love your podcast, but I can't listen to any music because I'm already listening to your podcast. So I can't do the run and listen to my music.
Right.
So these two themes in email, one is like, how do I do this? How do I promote interviews? And the other one's like, hey, I'm using your podcast, but I can't listen to music. So I started getting tired of sending people to other apps. So I'm like, maybe I should build an app.
And just to ask, so before this, the plans are free. People can just, yeah. So
Yeah.
you just were giving away this amazing content and plan. And then you start to see, okay, there's an actual problem that needs a solution.
And it was such a better experience. I'm like, wow, everyone needs to know about fueling. So I actually hired a developer to program the app, and it was called Fuel My Run. And you could track your run, and you could also create your own fueling plan. So you'd be running and it would tell you like time to fuel, and it would have lots of information on the types of gels to use and how many grams of carbohydrates per hour. But I slowly realized it's like I built something that I thought people wanted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then bridging back to None to Run, it was like the people were telling me,
Yes.
this is my problem. And so it was my second app. The second app was a totally different experience because like people were telling me exactly that they wanted it and they needed it, and here's what they needed. Whereas the other one was Mark thinking, oh, I think this is what people need and want. So
That's the first time I've heard that part of your story. And
yeah,
that's such an
I'm sure that
amazing
with you.
contrast. You lived the classic story of the entrepreneur that builds a solution in search of a problem. And you've also lived the other way, which is a pull from people saying, this is a need. And then you built something to meet that need, which was validated over a number of years through this interaction that you had with your audience. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. So that was the impetus to like, okay, I think I want to build another app, but I think this time we're starting from a better starting point because people are telling me this is what they want. I can tell you how the app was built if you want to go there, if you have anything else. Or
Tell me about the process of starting to build the app.
yeah, again, I'm not a coder. I have no experience doing that. So I came to the realization like, okay, I could hire someone to do this, but they're never gonna love it. And you have to manage that person. And it can be expensive to develop an app, especially if you want to hire someone to do it in North America or Europe or whatever. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do something different. I think I want to find someone to partner with and build this, and we'll see how that goes. So what I did, I started taking a look at tons of different apps that were already out there with similar functionality, None to Run. I found a bunch of people I emailed, and one fellow in particular, his name's Jeff, and he had this app called Intervals Pro. It seemed to be one of the most popular interval workout apps in the App Store. It wasn't just for running, it was for HIIT workouts, whatever. And so he was one of the few. He got back to me and hey, Mark, sounds great what you're building. Why don't we just chat sometime? So we had a chat over Zoom. And Jeff, he lives in Columbus, Ohio. Now I'm in Toronto. I remember taking a call like on my lunch in the boardroom at my job with Jeff, and then we had a first call and thought, okay, let's stay in touch. And he kind of looked in and on the run and a little bit of the background and realized, oh, it's got some traction. And we just kept in touch over the course of a couple months. And then he said, okay, why don't we bring the None to Run plan into my app? We'll label it None to Run, and we'll be able to keep track of how many people use it. And at least you'll have somewhere point people. I was like, that's great. Let's do that. And so we built it and started pointing people towards Intervals Pro, and people are like, oh, great. Here's the solution. I can listen to my own music. I'll get all the app coaching cues, telling me when to walk, when to run for the whole None to Run plan. This is awesome. And
So basically, the first version was like a white label of this app that he'd already built with None to Run kind of packaging.
and it wasn't its own app. It was part of his app. So still called Intervals Pro.
Got it. With a
But
None to Run plan or something.
within his app, he had a few template workouts.
Got it.
And one of the template workouts or plans was, hey, if you want None to Run, and it had every week 1 all the way through week 12, and you could do all the workouts in there. And so over 3, 4, 5 months, we started tracking. Yep, a lot of people are using it. People are liking it.
Yeah.
And we just kept in touch. And then finally we had a conversation where Jeff's, hey, listen, looks like you got something good here. It seems to be working. I'd be happy to build this out. If you want to just partner, we'll see what happens. And I'm like, perfect, let's do that. So Jeff fortunately had lots of similar functionality, and there's probably lots of code overlap. So we got the first version out. And I remember,
what year was it?
This is 2020. I remember the day exactly because my birthday, March 3rd of 2020 is when we launched it. So the timing was really good because we had built up an audience and email list of people who are already looking for a solution. We had Intervals Pro, but looking for like maybe a more running specific solution. So we had that. And then plus the whole world was about to shut down 2 weeks later, looking for stuff to do they could do on their own because of COVID. So it was a perfect storm. So we launched, and out of the gates, we had lots of downloads, and it was a subscription-based app, getting lots of positive reviews. So yeah, it was fantastic. We had early momentum. So this is March 2020, and I'm still working my job at this time.
Okay. So March 2020, just before the world shuts down, you launch this app. Yeah, at the perfect time for a solution. And it's not like it was only about the COVID boost, but you were already built on this foundation, but you benefited from a lot of people eventually or very soon would be looking for things that they could do to be active and healthy alone.
100%. Yeah.
Amazing. I definitely want to talk about Jeff and your relationship with him as well, because I know that's really important. But I'm interested in those early inner experiences. Every entrepreneur goes through their own version of this. Sometimes you're flying high, sometimes you're really discouraged, sometimes in the same day, sometimes in the same hour, you can feel that. And I wonder if you look back on that time, what you recall in terms of the inner experience of being a founder.
From the early days when we launched None to Run?
Yeah, if you want, you can weave this in with the story of what happened next. At this point, it's still like a side gig, but eventually it would become your main thing. So maybe if you want to weave it in with that part of the story too.
So yeah, this was 100% a side hustle, doing it in my free time, working my main job. And it was a challenging time. It was COVID, so my 2 boys were homeschool. I'm working from home. Sarah's working from home. Yeah, like it was a complete gong show. But again, there's Mark still skating around the rink. I'm still working on None to Run when I can on the side, and it's doing well. And yeah, I'm just like happy, not only because they're working and I'm helping lots of runners, and it's also financially bringing in money where, slowly over the next couple of years, it was bringing in, at least for me, getting close to the amount of money I was making in my job. I'm like, oh, this is great. And then it was Sarah. She had a good job and it was amazing support to me. And she's like, what does it look like if you did this full time and you left your job? And I was like, that would be amazing. I would love for that to be my thing. And I could focus more of my attention and energy and on it and see what Jeff and I could build. And yeah, so over a few months, pondered, what does this look like? And then it got to the point where, like I said, financially, it wasn't like a huge risk. If anything, it was like, it was a risk to keep doing both. Like I was holding none to run
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
So it got to that mindset. And so I think it was early 2022. I said, yep, my wife and I were like, let's do this. So I gave notice on my job, and that was scary because I'm all of a sudden like committing, wow, I'm going to work for myself now. But the big thing was the identity shift, which was evolved over the next couple of years. So going from like corporate Mark to founder Mark, yeah, it took a while for me to get comfortable with that, to the point where after I left my job in the investment and finance world, whenever people would ask me what I did, I would always sort of start with, I used to do this, but now I'm doing this. And I don't know why looking back, but now I'm comfortable, like, no, this is what I do. But I just hadn't shifted my identity. And it took a while for that, for
Yeah.
me to be comfortable with what my identity is as a founder and entrepreneur. And even becoming the face of Nanaran, that took some time.
Can we click in on that for a minute? I'm curious, when you think about that transition, the identity shift, how much of the struggle saying, this is what I do now, was coming from, do you think, was coming from inside of you? And how much of it was perhaps thinking about the perception of others?
Definitely a bit of both because, yeah, I worked in the compliance sort of fields, and in that world, conflicts of interests are a big deal. So I always wanted to be open and transparent about, you had to disclose any outside interests, which I did. So that was part of it. My job is my focus, and this is something I do on the side on my free time. So there was always a bit of that. And then the other side of it was just, yeah, it just felt a bit weird. I never worked for myself, and all of a sudden didn't have an office anymore. I'm working from my basement, and I didn't have to get dressed up to go to work anymore. And then I can make my own decisions, and I decided what to do with my time. Even that was difficult because you're so used to some of that being done for you. And now
Yeah.
you're sitting there, I'm like, okay, what am I going to work on?
Yeah. One thing, just to circle back to something that you've said, I'm struck, and I don't think I saw it as clearly before, but I'm struck how many important inflection points along the way Sarah's encouragement played a key role in you taking that next step. And it just reminds me about how important it is and how helpful it is to have a supportive partner when we're doing these sorts of things that are risky and require us to step outside of not just our comfort zone, but also some of the rules that have been created around us about what a good career looks like, what a reasonable path, vocational path looks like.
Yeah, 100%. Like I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. Like if it wasn't for her encouragement, being a sounding board, her support. Yeah, it's been unbelievable.
So
For
you're,
for the first little while too, when my mom was sharing like with her friends and stuff, what I was up to, she kept telling people that I had retired. So I had to change my mom's thinking around this too. And I was like, Mom, there's a difference between working for yourself and being retired.
that's amazing. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So just have good chuckles about that.
Oh man. I think that's just so relatable too, probably for anybody out there who's listening who has taken a step outside of the known path. These little things, how one's parents talk about the work that you do Like it matters. And in this case, it sounds like you were able to talk to your mom. And what does she say now when people ask her what you do?
Good question. I should check in with her again on that. No, she knows too. And my parents have been hugely supportive as well, even though I'm
Oh,
sure
that's
like
awesome.
from a different generation, they're probably first hard to understand. Like, what? You're doing this now? But no, they've been amazing. But yeah, be a curious question to ask them. What do you tell people now?
So tell me, maybe take me back into this identity shift and this, you've got not just the leaving the corporate structure and all of the structures that, when you're in that environment, help help you know what to focus on when and order your day, to this more open space of there's nobody telling you what to do but you. And also the sort of reluctant, you talked about there's kind of reluctant face of the business aspect of this. And maybe take me back into that season. And what do you think it was that allowed you to step more fully into that space and really own that role as founder?
Part of it too, I think it was part of my evolution as an entrepreneur. I needed some decompression stage coming out of my job
Yeah.
to just have some freedom and not be so structured. Like I could go for a run or a bike ride any time of the day. I could work in my sweaty spandex after my bike ride. I think I needed some time to just decompress and enjoy what I had. And that was probably a year and a half to 2 years of just a bit of that, just like working on whatever like, Jeff and I thought was good to work, not a lot of structure. Jeff and I would talk, but it wasn't always regular check-ins with what's going on. And then over time, as I want to grow this bigger, not just from the revenue standpoint, but also to have a bigger impact on the world, it's funny, you start to, oh, that's why when I worked my job, we had weekly staff meetings, and
Right.
that's why we have to document processes and procedures. It's so funny when you're in it, you're like, oh, this is such a drag. We're doing all this. You start to really hate all that stuff. And now I've come full circle. I'm like, oh, now I get why companies do all that stuff. So I'm
Mhm.
actually come full circle. I'm working with you, a coach, Jeff and I checking in regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. You needed that middle period that we sometimes call the neutral zone or the wilderness to reorient. The other thing that stands out to me here is just in that story about like this dawning realization of, oh, this is why structure and process can be helpful in building organizations. I think what you experienced in maybe in some phases of your corporate life was what a lot of people in companies experience when the structures and the mechanisms to get work done are divorced or maybe disconnected from purpose and mission. And now that there's this integration in what you're currently building between purpose and mission and the structures that will support your team doing the best work possible. Oh, yeah, it makes sense. We should meet. We
Yeah.
should maybe have an agenda. We should maybe set some goals
Right.
because it's connected to mission and purpose and the thing that you're trying to do.
Right.
I'm watching the clock and recognizing we may want to do a part two of this to catch some of the things. But before we wrap, I'd love to shift into, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the relationship you have with customers, the people who use None to Run, who get value out of the plan. Because one of the things that has struck me in my getting to know you is just what a wonderful relationship you have with your customers. So maybe just to start, what do you really love about engaging with folks who are using None to Run? And what have you learned through that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think initially it was this kind of, you're just excited to get people to download your running plan PDF and people to download the app. And these people were just email addresses to you.
Mm.
You're like, oh, this is cool, these vanity metrics. But yeah, it is so much more meaningful to having this community component where I'm actually seeing the real people and the real stories and how we can have an impact on their lives. That's been huge.
Story that stands out? Anyone that I know you have countless ones, but any that jump out?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. There's like definitely like themes that stand out. There's been hundreds or thousands of cool stories. Like there's not one that pops out, but definitely themes of people coming in that have really struggled with running or health and fitness or confidence in their
Mm,
lives, really helping these people. Like gym class was always the worst and scariest place in school for them. They could never run the lap or the mile run. They're like, that was miserable, can never do that. And I've had people overcome that and all of a sudden they're running regularly and they're just like, wow, I've never done this in my whole life, not even as a kid.
wow.
I've had people struggling with body image and what they look like to the point where they were doing their runs only at night because they didn't want anyone to see them and running on paths that no one else was on. And if they saw someone, they would stop running in fear of embarrassing themselves and looking too slow or not looking like a runner. We've seen people overcome those types of scenarios. We've seen people coming back after conquering cancer. There's so many amazing stories. Some of the cool ones too are the people who have been in the non-running community for like years and they keep doing the running program, or they're just hanging out in the community and they're almost like coaches now. Like they know just as much about helping these beginner runners as I do. And they're in there supporting people, coming into all the video calls. I did a run meetup in London, England, and I just said, hey, I'm going to Hyde Park on this day, this time. It was actually really close to where I proposed to Sarah, so that was cool.
Oh, awesome.
And like 15 people showed up to
Wow.
15 strangers come meet me across the Atlantic to run in Hyde Park to meet me. And we did a group run and we got a bunch of photos. I'm like, wow, this is so cool. I did another one in Columbus, Ohio. One woman served in the US Air Force and she sent me a really cool Air Force t-shirt. So it's been really cool to connect with all these amazing people. Last week I had a phone call or a video call, like a coaching call with a woman who lives in Bangalore, India. And she was wearing my None to Run t-shirt. I'm like, this stuff blows my mind just to connect with these people all around the world and to know that you can help them. It's really cool.
Yeah, I don't know if people will be watching this on video or listening to it on audio, but if they're listening to it on audio, what they can't see is the way your face is lighting up right now. It's impacting people's lives on so many more levels. There's the helping somebody rewrite their own story of
Right.
being the one who couldn't complete the mile in gym class to now being one who is able to build a sustainable fitness habit, running habit. It's really cool.
And even just from a health standpoint, like people who are able to manage their diabetes. I've had stories of people like, hey, I don't need to take my cholesterol medication anymore. My doctor's so pleased with what I'm doing. If a doctor is saying this is a good and safe way for people to get active and improve their physical and mental health, then that's awesome.
Yeah. Here's what I think we need to do. I think now would be a good time for us to wrap part one of this conversation.
Yeah.
What I'd love to do is come back and finish this out with more of a conversation that lets us dig into what's currently happening at None to Run and where do you see the company and the entire movement heading into the future. So, can we get back together and we'll finish that conversation up?
It's a good idea. I think a part two is probably the best way to get a great story there.
We've got a great story, even in just what we talked about today, and I can't wait to finish that conversation with you soon,
Awesome.
Mark.